All right, so today we're going to be discussing the new firmware update for the Panasonic S1H, which brings BRAW, external RAW recording using the video assist. And I have a lovely guest joining me to talk about this today, Jordan Drake from Deep Review. Say hi, Jordan.
Hey, everybody. You're using that word lovely wrong.
You're messing up the flow with a cold open. What you're supposed to just say is, let's get undone.
It's Jordan with Gerald. Let's get undone.
Gerald undone. He's crazy. Okay, so as usual, a little disclosure. Panasonic sent me the S1H. This is a 24-70. I also have a 7200. There might even be another lens in the box there. I don't know. And they arranged for Blackmagic to send me the video assist. Although, to be truthful, it's not this one. It was a 7-inch one, which I also have. But I've been using the 5-inch one because it's more portable. Nikon arranged to send me the 5-inch one. It's very confusing. All these things are loaners. I have to send them all back afterwards. No money changed hands. I don't get to keep any of this stuff. But this is all on loan from Panasonic. And I'm going to be doing a Nikon video as well in the future. And not that it's important for me to disclose any of Jordan's information, but I'm pretty sure that Jordan has the same.
Same deal, yeah.
Yeah. Did you get a 5-inch or 7-inch?
I got a 7-inch as well, which I don't have a 5-inch from Nikon, so it was a little cumbersome out there.
This is already kind of unwieldy. I mean, I love the S1H, but it's a monster, and when you add all this extra stuff on it, this video is sponsored though, and that's by Storyblocks, not by Panasonic. Okay, so. Are you posting your own video, by the way, on this?
I will be later, yeah. We're still running some tests here. And I want to get my hands on an S1. I don't have a date yet, no.
Okay. Why do you want to get your hands on an S1? For value comparison?
Yeah, because it got all the, a lot of the high-res stuff from the S1H and everything like that, so.
People are probably going to ask me what I think of the S1H versus the S1 now with the firmware updates. I already made a video comparing them a few months, maybe a year or so ago. I still think that video holds. If anything, maybe just the gap closed even more, just a little bit. But I would still say that the same principle. So I would watch that video if you want to know whether to get an S1 or S1H. The S1 just got a little bit better still, is all I would say. And all these firmware updates for all the cameras are available as of today for us, which is March 31st. I'm not sure when I'm going to post this video though. But the only one right now that gets BRAW is the S1H. Panasonic told me they don't really have any plans, but maybe if a lot of people like the BRAW here, maybe other cameras will get it. We'll see. So jumping in on that, Jordan, first impressions of the image, I guess, would be my question for you.
Yeah, I've been doing ProRes RAW quite a bit off of the S1H, and we've got a couple videos on that. And it's been a real development from, being... It had very few features from the get-go, and you couldn't do a lot of the stuff you'd expect with RAW video initially.
Right.
If you tried to do a complete white balance shift from daylight to tungsten, the image would fall apart. So a lot of the advantages of RAW weren't there, and it's gotten better over the last year, where bringing it into Resolve now with the BRAW, it feels very similar to where we already are with ProRes RAW right now. We're not missing a lot of features. I don't have access to white balance, but that is coming very soon. And they actually had a somewhat functional beta of Resolve that supported the white balance adjustment. So
you weren't using that? I'm still running that sketchy beta. And they were like, don't use it to edit your videos. I edited my last 2 videos on it. It seems to be working. So I did play with the white balance adjustment. It works. I can say that it works.
It's there, yeah, absolutely.
What I can say though is that it's not perfect. I haven't used the ProRes. By the way, so there's some construction going on here. It was supposed to stop by the time Jordan and I scheduled a call, but if you keep hearing it, if it annoys you, here's some footage of it. I shot it using Blackmagic RAW of them moving dirt out there. There you go. It's probably playing right now while I'm talking. Anyway, you'll have to excuse it, please. But yeah, so I don't know what it's like with ProRes RAW, the latest versions with Final Cut, when it comes to, say, shooting at 3200 or 8000 and just dropping it at 5500. But I tested it with BRAW, and it's way better than shooting internal and trying to shift your white balance a couple thousand Kelvin, because you get crazy color shifts and everything, and it falls, and your exposure goes out of whack too because of, moving the intensities. For BRAW, if you adjust the white balance, your exposure remains intact, and there's not really any color shifts. The only thing is that it's not perfect in the sense of you can't set a 2000 Kelvin to 5500 and a 10,000 Kelvin to 5500. They don't look exactly the same.
Right.
One might need a +5 tint and one might be a 5400 or something. With ProRes, is it kind of perfect now where if you just type in a white balance, it's the same on both? Or is there a little bit of like finessing you still have to do?
There's still always a little bit of finessing, and even when I was comparing these two formats together, that was still the case in terms of how the tint comes out on both of them.
Okay.
But I do find anytime I do a heavy white balance push in ProRes, I have to adjust the tint to some extent a little bit.
While we're on the topic of color, have you compared internal versus Blackmagic RAW, and did you notice that there's a bit of a color shift between the two of them?
Yeah, I found it was a little warmer, a little pink, like again, that magenta shift a little bit when I brought the BRAW files in compared to the internal 10-bit vlog profile.
I found that, I don't know if you did much with sky, but I found that a blue sky was actually a bit more cyan on the BRAW. And I shot a chart, I'll put it up right now, the internal versus the BRAW. And if you look at the vector scopes, there is, I don't know if this is like a resolve update will fix this, like the way that they're interpreting it or something, or assigning it to vlog, but it's not quite right. It's like, you know, a little bit off. And maybe that'll be fixed with just sort of like some future revisions, because I also noticed something, I wasn't sure if you did, where the levels seem wrong on the BRAW recordings. It almost seems like you're comparing like full versus legal range, or like video levels versus data levels.
Yeah.
At first I thought I was just like, BRAW is a bit more contrasty, but then I was talking to a friend, Dennis, who pointed out that he thinks it looks like a video levels thing, so I popped down one of those level range fixes that you might be used to using on like your Atomos, and it just immediately made the two clips look the same in terms of, you know, luma values and intensity. So this is a Blackmagic, I'm just saying to Blackmagic right now, there seems to be an issue where the Blackmagic RAW clips from the S1H are being interpreted at like video levels, and even if you go into the clip attribution, change them to full, it doesn't change anything. You have to apply like a levels LUT, which is not ideal. So hopefully that can also be fixed in the future updates. So the LUT that I made for myself, Jordan, the monitoring LUT, was like a levels fix, a vlog to 709 conversion, and then a bunch of like hue shifting. But then I was able to like really monitor a really lovely image on the video assist. But I do have one more complaint, and then it's all positive, I think, after this. Does your video assist look kind of rosy, peachy, pinker than like, do you kind of have like a pink cast?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I thought it was, I mentioned there was kind of that warmer magenta shift to it, and I thought it was much more severe when I was out shooting than it actually was once I got it into Resolve.
Because I think the screen, the actual display, and I did a little Googling, and there's like a whole forum on it where I think it might be a known issue that really it's my only complaint. I quite like the video assist, but the display is a little bit pink, especially if you compare it to the panel on the S1H itself. But overall, I did enjoy using the video assist, the new 12G one. You said that you happen to be a fan of it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I really like, I just found, the startup time is a nice change from the Ninja 5.
It is, and you can turn it off quickly too. You don't have to like eat over it.
Having
SD card.
double L-mount batteries is really sweet as well, because we do tend to do a lot of long takes, and we've definitely had ninjas conk out and actually corrupt a file on us before when we're recording RAW.
Sure.
So, having that I think was wonderful.
The interface is great for anybody that's ever used Blackmagic. I mean, I might make a full video comparing the Atomos. I actually do like the SSD caddy on the Atomos. I think I prefer using SSDs over SD cards just due to like price per gigabyte.
Yeah.
But the interface is fantastic if you've ever used Blackmagic. It's like
the same as a camera, yeah.
Touchscreen buttons is boop, boop, boop. You know, it works well. Good monitoring tools. It's great.
And it's really nice, too, that you've got those same tools when you're shooting RAW. Like you can choose your constant bit rate or a variable data rate, where with ProRes RAW, it's just ProRes RAW, ProRes RAW HQ, you know, and it doesn't actually tell you what's going on under the hood there. So I far prefer Blackmagic's implementation of that.
And it's impressive what you can do to an SD card. I was a little bit apprehensive. I thought 5.9K at Q0 or 3:1 would not work, but I don't think every SD card will work, but I was using the Tough G cards from Sony, like the V90s.
Same. Yeah.
And no issues. Even at Q0, which theoretically should be able to go up to like faster than the card will allow, I had it set to stop recording if it drops a frame. So I would know if it did, and I was just running around like a maniac, and it never dropped a frame for me. So, but I mean, you probably don't need to shoot at that though. I found that Q5, 5:1, 8:1. I'll put some charts up on the screen right now, going through the different compression ratios. I couldn't see a difference, to be honest, between 12:1 even, or whatever the smallest one is. So theoretically, you can get a decent bit of record time on an SD card if you lower your compression. And like you said, it's great that they have that option.
Yeah, we did some tests on our Blackmagic Pocket cinema review doing a really tough key and just ran through all the raw data rates. And yeah, once we got past 5:1, there was, 5:1 and down is still beautiful for pretty much any use you've got.
ISO control, though, is not a thing. I'm sure you noticed but that is I watched your video on the ProRes one. Some cameras have elements and other ones don't, right? But I reached out to Blackmagic to ask because you can do white balance and they do have an exposure slider, but they don't have there is a drop-down box for ISO. It's in the same place because you're still just using Resolve, but it's always grayed out on any of the 3 cameras that I tried for Blackmagic RAW. And a product manager at Blackmagic said that they've disabled all third-party cameras BRAW ISO adjustment, and it was decided because across the camera manufacturers, ISO is approached in different ways, different digital and analog gains, and as a result, we found that the exposure control gives a consistent adjustment for all cameras and ISO levels. So if you were doing this solely just to be able to change your ISO, that's not a thing. But I found I wasn't even really using the exposure control either. I was actually just making a curve. Resolve's great in that way that an early node is almost as good as a RAW panel.
Totally.
So I didn't really care, but it is worth noting that there's no ISO control.
Well, and it is very important because that's not in there. If you're used to working with a red or something like that, you do have to choose which of the 2 gain settings you're going to use and pin it down properly. If you're going to really push that exposure up, don't shoot your camera at 640 ISO selected. You want to bump it up to the 2000 ISO second gain step and then really bring it up. So make sure you get that right in camera. But otherwise, it's the same thing that we have with ProRes RAW. I'm still waiting for someone to give me an answer if there's any difference between using their ISO slider and their exposure adjustment on that. If you're running a camera with dual gain, seems to just be like set the, one of the 2 base gain steps and you get the exact same results doing an exposure boost as compared to you doing an ISO adjustment.
Did you notice any difference analyzing the image at all for, detail or noise or anything like that?
There was a little bit sharper image coming out of the BRAW, but it wasn't actually recording more detail. Once I sharpened up my ProRes RAW footage, they matched up. So it does seem like you're just getting a little closer to delivery with the BRAW once you run those files through.
Did you feel the same way about noise? Did you find that the ProRes was the noisiest and then BRAW was less so, or what do you think?
Looking at it just in the shadow areas at 2000, they look exactly the same to me.
Yeah.
Even though with a little bit more sharpening on the BRAW, you'd think that noise would be more noticeable. But I'll have to do a heavy push and see if that's still the case.
I shot at 640 and internal versus BRAW, I found the BRAW was maybe like a few % noisier. Something I did notice though, which this is probably good information for people that have never used any kind of RAW thing and they got the S1H, and you can turn off a lot of things in the S1H. You can turn noise reduction down to -1, that's okay. When I say the noise was very similar between BRAW and the S1H internal, that was with the noise reduction set to -1. If you have the noise reduction at 0 or +1 or +2, then you're going to find that the RAW is noisier. But also you can turn off most corrections for like lens and other stuff. There's one thing you can't turn off though, which is distortion compensation. So I noticed in the 24-70, if I compared just 2 images, the internal one always had distortion compensation on, and the RAW one would have, depending on whether I was at 24 or 70, would have one type of distortion or another. And you can fix this in post, but what was interesting is it actually made the BRAW a bit sharper because I think the distortion compensation kind of like blurs the edges a little bit. So when I shot BRAW before applying the distortion, it looked a bit sharper. And then when I corrected the distortion in Resolve, then they looked equally sharp again. So maybe that means if you were going to crop in a little bit, that you might get a slightly sharper image because it's not distortion correct. But again, this is marginal, like super marginal. It's probably not even what we're talking about. I don't know, but what is my channel for if not that, I'm curious if you noticed it. My theory is that you wouldn't have noticed a difference in dynamic range. My gut tells me that they'd look the same to you.
I had a very high contrast shot I can actually send you
Cool.
with the sun behind a windmill. And yeah, my clipping point was identical and shadows lined up exactly the same.
So that's good to know because I did test it, like, with the charts and stuff like that. I busted out the Xyla 21 and It is slightly worse on the BRAW, like 1/5 of a stop consistently. And I was able to reproduce this if I overexpose by about half a stop to a stop, and then I recover the highlights, the internal recovers just a smidge more, is smidge a word?
Smidge is a word, yeah.
It recovers a smidge more detail on the internal. But I think that's why I asked you the question first. Functionally, I don't think you'll notice a difference. One thing I should say about the dynamic range, though, is that currently there is no highlight recovery checkbox option enabled in DaVinci Resolve, but I was able to get that on the other third-party cameras, so maybe that will be a future possibility for this camera. And then in that case, it might change what I said about there's a little bit better recovery in the highlights, then the BRAW might win. Currently, it doesn't win by just a little bit, but it might if they activate that highlight recovery. But right now, it's not a thing. Did you hear anything about them doing anything with that?
They didn't mention anything on my briefing, but I did find that the highlight recovery when I was just shooting with the 12K camera made actually a substantial difference.
It does.
So yeah, I think I'm very curious once that's enabled if it will pull it ahead of ProRes RAW a little bit.
I did go through an experiment, changing it to Canon log, changing it to Blackmagic Design Gen 5, changing it to different, like, because you can convert to different logs to see if there would be any, a better log to choose. I actually got the best result from Vlog. It was like 12.6. If I went to Canon log 2, I got like 12.5, and then like another was 12.3. So stick with Vlog. I wouldn't bother. Like if you have a workflow for like RE log C, I mean, you can do that. But I do find that the Vlog was probably the best of the conversions. I just didn't like the color shift, but hopefully that'll be fixed. I know you're a fan of Vlog.
Love Vlog.
And I thought it looked great. I'm pretty happy with the image. Coming from somebody who didn't use ProRes RAW on it, that's me. But you're not really that surprised? Like, is the image just kind of like, yeah, that's what you were expecting, or what do you think?
Yeah, I was really looking for a big differentiator. Like you said, for someone who's using both NLEs, is there one reason to choose one over the other? And there's small nitpicky differences, like I mentioned, the tint and things like that, or, applying a tiny bit more sharpening to the ProRes RAW. But in general, it took me like 30 seconds to match every one of those clips between the two of them. So the big benefit is now we have the option of very flexible RAW, especially once we get white balance adjustments in BRAW. Then the only reason that I would choose one over the other really is what am I planning to edit it on, so I don't have to round trip anything. I still think for the majority of work, shooting RAW really brings a lot of extra work into it. You have to do things like those lens corrections or sharpening, noise reduction. All of those are steps that are all pretty demanding on your machine as well. So if quick turnaround's important, I do tell people, like, just disregard RAW video for the most part, because you're not seeing a big dynamic range bump. It's really the white balance adjustments is what I find most useful about it. So for a short film or a big commercial project, absolutely. But a lot of the times, like, do you have dialed in color already? Does everything look great on the monitor? You can probably get by with internal 10-bit in most situations. And that's not the case on a lot of other cameras.
Learn how to white balance correctly, and then, really, what are you getting out of it? Nothing really, right? Unless you just need maximum control, like, less filtering, less sharpening, less all that stuff. But it's the S1H is probably the worst example to sell BRAW.
Yeah.
Because it does so well to not mess the image up that much to begin with. And I think you just said that, like, on other cameras, there might be a much more compelling reason. But for the S1H, it's really just white balance and performance.
We generally shoot in the 10-bit 422 150 megabit per second mode.
Right.
And yeah, it chugs your computer, absolutely. So depending on what your workflow is, on other NLEs, it's proxies a lot of the time, or I'll just do like a base adjustment, and then I've already got optimized media on Final Cut once I do that. But it is much easier to work with native ProRes RAW in Final Cut or BRAW in Resolve. So if you don't want to worry about proxies or something like that, it'll take up more storage space, but that could be a compelling reason to just jump over to working with these. But again, factor in the fact that the most demanding things to render seem to be noise reduction and lens correction, and you're gonna have to do that.
Maybe I'm just gonna default back to the workflow that I like, but maybe the best bet is just to record externally, but using the image that already, like, just using ProRes or DNX, not RAW. And that way you're getting 10-bit white balance it properly yourself, but then you got the lens corrections. You can control the noise reduction in camera, and the S1H has a great control for that if you want a minimal amount. Like maybe that's still, because then you're still not poorly leveraging SD cards.
And your performance is going to be right in line with those. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
You're not going to get 6K out of the HDMI for DNX or ProRes normal. You have to do RAW. But you do get an oversampled 6K to 4K, which I compared them, and the oversampled 6K image on the S1H is very good. It's hard to tell the difference in a 4K timeline between the oversampled 4K and the actual 6K RAW. But if you want to shoot 4K 60, well, 4K 60 is always a Super 35 crop on this. But if you just want to shoot 4K 24, you're not getting some kind of oversampled image. You're still getting a Super 35 crop. Keep that in mind. If you're a 4K shooter, this probably doesn't make any sense to go this route.
Yeah.
Wrap this up for me, Jordan. What's the final word?
Final word is kind of what I touched on before. God damn it. Let me clean that up.
No, that's it. That was our final word.
My final word is what I said 10 minutes ago.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where, you could really use some footage, but, shooting yourself was either logistically or budgetarily unfeasible? Has that ever happened to you, Jordan?
That has happened to me on occasion. This is an excellent segue, Gerald.
Well, if that happens to you or to any of our lovely viewers, Storyblocks has you covered with an impressive collection of stock footage covering a wide range of subjects with unlimited downloads and 4K video. They're also amply supplied with backgrounds, overlays, and After Effects templates, and the interface is easy to use and navigate, and the clips are royalty-free for both personal and commercial use, so you can use them as much as you want, wherever you want. So if you think, Jordan, or anybody else listening, you could take advantage of a fantastic library of quality stock footage and effects, check out Storyblocks using the link in the description below. And thank you, Jordan, for joining me in this impromptu RAW talk. Definitely check out DP Review if you haven't. I don't know how Gerald Undone is plugging DP Review TV. That doesn't make any sense. I watched you guys too back before I even had a YouTube channel. I used to watch Camera Store. Yeah, you guys are great. And it's been great having you on, man. Thanks a lot.
Congratulations on 250 as well.
Thank you, sir. But that's going to be it for me. I hope you found this video entertaining, or at least helpful. And if you did, make sure to leave the old thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already. But if you did not find this video helpful or entertaining, try setting the playback speed to 75%.
All right. We're done.